After 5 years of creating exciting business content with amazing businesses from around the world, Savvy is now creating a new video series entitled Heartbeat of the World. This series will feature experts from around the globe. We will highlight and discuss some of the greatest challenges facing the U.S. and the world. Co-create with us and find out more at bit.ly/savvypatron.
Savvy Business Radio runs in syndication on 8 AM/FM stations nationwide, including iHeartRadio and 6 podcasting platforms. To find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or to become a guest and find out how we can help you get your message out in a bigger way, call 732-474-7375 or email Christina@savvybusinessradio.com.
Ever wanted to know the inside scoop on wine? Well, today our expert in wine compliance, Anne Reynolds, shares her vast experience of all things having to do with wine. Find out more about Anne and read her newest book, The Inside Story of the Wine Label, at winecompliance.com. Hi, Anne. Welcome to Savvy Business Radio. How are you today?
I'm well, thanks. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm super excited to have you. As we just mentioned before the interview, we have never had of your business and caliber on Savvy. Talking about what you do, you help winemakers stay in compliance and get the perfect label for their wine. And as I told you, many of our listeners are women and love wine, including myself. So we're going to totally love to hear your tips on getting the perfect wine and being able to decipher from the labels which is a really good wine, and find out more about your story. Share that with the audience. How did you come to doing this very niche-oriented business?
Yeah, well, that is I did not set out to be in the world that I am now in, but I did grow up here in Napa. So, a little bit of that winemaking activity has been happening around here for a while. And so as it just turned out through kind of the evolution in my life of the pursuit of a full-time job, I did wind up working in the winery world. Mm-hmm. So that's what eventually led, after a few years of working at different wineries here in Napa Valley, I wound up doing what is basically winery compliance at a winery. And it all took off from there.
That's very fascinating because I never really thought about the labels and that there were certain codes or specifications that you had to adhere to. Share a little bit about that for people who don't know about the wine world.
Right. So, yeah, exactly. So, for example, often when I meet people, for the first time in whatever environment it might be, and then we get to the point where we say, well, what do you do? And I say, I'm a winery compliance expert, and they give me a blank look in return. I usually, one of my go-to responses to clarify what that is I say, well, you've seen a wine label, right? And of course, everybody has. And I say, that's compliance. What you're staring at, essentially every item that appears there is regulated by the federal government. And that's a big part of my world. So.
Wow. That's intriguing because I like this certain sparkling wine. I won't mention the names because I don't want to get them into trouble, but they recently changed their label. And I said to the person I go and get my wine from, what happened to their old label? I liked it. And they said, well, actually, it was too close to another company, and they sued them. So they had to change their label. I was like, oh, bummer, because now it's very, very plain. She said, don't worry, they're looking to totally change that label. This is just a stand-in until they're able to get a whole new label set up. But that left me intrigued. But they're still my favorite sparkling wine. But what I've noticed when I go to the wine store and say, hey, I feel like a little different punch today, and I start looking around at the different wines, I often look at not only the blends and such, or my favorite, which is Merlot. I will also look at, which one attracts me most, which label kind of gets my attention, kind of like you do when you go to a bookstore. Often it's not just the title that grabs you, but also the book cover. Does that play a big part in people choosing their wines?
It really does. And that was a large inspiration behind my writing the book, my book on wine labels, was observing folks in the wine aisle, because here in California, that's what it is at a grocery store. It's an aisle of bottles and bottles of wine, and just observing people standing there, with often kind of an overwhelmed look on their face to make a decision out of the sea of bottles. So, because in the wine label, I like to, describe it as the marquee for a wine, and knowing some of the details behind what those items mean on a wine label, I can make any wine shopping experience just that much more interactive. It doesn't have to be so overwhelming when you're standing there in the aisle.
Wow. And this recalls for me, it was a great movie. I think it was, oh man, I forgot the name of it, but it was with Robin Williams. And he had just come as an immigrant from Russia. And the first time he walked into a grocery store and saw all the different choices, I think he passed out in the movie. And it was funny because I can imagine, because you don't realize until you go to another country that doesn't have the choices we have in the United States with wine and all the different products, that we're overly overwhelmed with all the different products we get to choose from. And your book is called The Inside Story of Wine Labels, which is fascinating. What tips do you have for listeners who are, say, love wine, but they wouldn't really call themselves a connoisseur of wine, to look out for getting that great bottle?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, for one, there's three items that are very common on a wine label, but they're actually technically not required to be there. But we're so used to seeing them. And the first one is a varietal. So, like you mentioned earlier, Merlot. It's a type of a wine grape. So Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, these are some of the most common ones. So there's that for one, and then one of the next ones I would also mention is an appellation. So that's the where of where the wine grapes came from to make the wine. So it might be Napa Valley, for example. It might be, a state. It might just be California. And again, that's not required, but very, very, very common on wine labels. So shoppers out there, picking up a bottle of wine and say, for example, it says Merlot, Napa Valley. Right there, they then automatically know that at least 75% of that wine is Merlot grapes, or came from Merlot grapes, and at least 85% of the grapes were grown in the Napa Valley viticultural area. So right there, they know those two things, a little more, if you will, intimate details about that wine's story. Those are just two examples. And I cover several in the book.
Wow. Now you say 85% at least. Does that mean a portion of the grapes could come from somewhere else? I didn't know they did that.
Correct. Yeah, it's extremely common for wineries to blend. Just they've got all their, what we call the lots of wine sitting in their cellar, and then it comes up on preparing for a bottling, and they will go through and they will sample, and they will sit there and they will do their trials, where they put together little bits and pieces of what they have sitting in the wine cellar and taste them and see what they think, and based on that, put together their blends that eventually will then get bottled.
Interesting.
That varies year to year for most wineries.
Wow. And for me, I've always been attracted to Merlot, but what I've come to realize is not all Merlots are equal as far as tasting the same. I've gone into one restaurant and I just love it. Another one's a bit more tart for me and dry. Why is it that it's the Merlot grape, but it doesn't taste the same in all places?
Exactly. Yeah. So that can have certainly to do with where it was grown. So that's again be the appellation, the Napa Valley, for example, or like I said, it could be a county name on the label where it was grown. Factors in for sure with grapes. And then there's also just a winemaking style. So, some wineries are more proficient at making certain types of wine. They're known for making a Merlot, for example, but they're not so good at making another type of grape.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
This is really intriguing because I recall I've lived in New York most of my life now, and I love bagels, I love pizza, and I've heard people who are outside of New York say that when they leave the New York City area, the bagels and the pizza are not quite the same tasting, and they said it's based on the water because the water we put in the pizza is based on our location, and the water tastes slightly different. So hence the bagels and the pizza taste different because of the bread. And I'm guessing maybe this is why the grapes taste different on the location because the water that seeps into the plant is a little bit different.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. We talk a lot about the terroir of wine, and that's very much a lot of that is to do with the soil type. Like you said, the growing conditions, and soil is just one of those items. Totally ties into what the finished product.
Wow. And for me, I started drinking wine, and it was Bola when I first moved out, and it was, what was it? It was a white blend. I forgot the name of it now. But for years, I wouldn't touch any other wine. I knew nothing about wine other than once in a while I would get a bottle of that. What would you say for someone who's not a connoisseur, doesn't go out and get wine all too often, but maybe would like to expand their palate and get to know wine? What would be your advice for them to expand and to get to know wines?
Right. So starting from a starting point of what they do know that they have liked, you know, like you said, if they've liked a white blend, and from there, I something like even just from that example alone, a white blend, I would highly recommend a rosé wine. Rosés have really had a big surge in the last year or so, at least in the wine world. A lot of new labels out there, or wineries making a rosé style wine, which I like. That's one of my favorites, quite honestly. And you've got a real range there. You know, sometimes you'll pick up, you know, these are going to be wines that are kind of a pink in a color, a light pink to a dark pink. And they may say rosé on the label. They may say, you know, a varietal name like a rosé of Pinot Noir, for example, or a rosé of Syrah, which are two types of red wine grapes, but they're made in a rosé style. So lighter, if you will, lighter. So if somebody already knows they like a white blend, kind of similar, but stepping out, but in a similar vein, I would suggest that for one.
Well, that's really cool because I got turned on to a rosé. I think it's called Barefoot Australian wine, and what's really cool is it comes with a resealable cap. And I love that because sometimes you don't have the thing on hand, you bring it to a party, you're like, bam, I don't need to worry about how I'm going to open it. It not only opens very easily, but it closes so you don't lose all the yummy bubbles because it's a sparkling wine. And it's a lot of fun. It's a little dry, but a lot of fun. And you're right. It's just because I've never tried the rosé until just a couple of years ago. And I was like, let me try this kind of in between wine. And so tell me, is the rosé kind of a mix between the white and red grapes?
Well, it can be. So all it takes to qualify, if you will, again, at my level of the regulation wise, federal wise, for a wine to be called a rosé is it just has to have that color.
Oh, okay.
And that's a pretty wide range. It can be really pale pink to incredibly dark pink, almost, basically close to what a red wine might look like. And that's all it takes at the federal level to label your wine a rosé. But you're right, it can be made. They tend to be made mostly from the juice from red wine grapes. But I've seen plenty. So sometimes you pick up a bottle of wine, and on the label it actually names all the grapes, the types of grapes that went into it with the percentage. And I've seen several examples of rosés where, say, 3 of the different types of grapes are red wine grapes, and then one of them is a white grape. And again, this is backing into a blending sort of thing. The winemakers are like, ooh, let's, we're trying these 4 together, and one of them just happens to be some white wine. But because of the flavor profile, it just all works together lovely in the blend. That's how it comes out.
Well, it's really fascinating. And, it wasn't until just talking to you today that I even realized that these were all coming from different types of grapes. It intrigued me, like, how are all these wines different but they're all made from grape, and it's because they're all not just one grape out there.
Exactly. Yeah. There's quite a few, and there's just like as the ones I mentioned earlier that we mostly know of, but there are so many others out there that can be used in winemaking.
Wow. And when you started your business and you were working with the wineries, what was the aha moment that led you to believe that I could turn into a niche business? Was there a moment that happened for you? Or
there was a couple of them. Great question. For example, many years ago, and this was when I was in my earlier years of doing the compliance work. At this time, I'm working at a winery here in Calistoga. Sterling Vineyards, which has been around a long time, and I had gone and signed up. So backing up a little bit, when I started doing the compliance work at Sterling, I had a lot of questions. I just had questions about how to keep the records, and questions about reporting things, and questions about labels, and nobody could give me the answers. And so I started looking around for where can I find training in this very specialized area, regulated area, and there was hardly anything to be found. So I did find there was it was just a one-day class I took a couple of years later, maybe at UC Davis here, and on winery compliance. And I'm sitting there in this class, like I said, this one-day class, and I'm thinking to myself, I could teach this.
Yeah.
So I would say that is an example of a light bulb moment that I had. And, it was still a few years later before I did start my business that I've been running for 8 years now here in Napa. But it was actually, I started teaching a class in winery compliance a couple of years before I started the business.
Wow.
So.
This is fascinating because I know a couple of years ago I did oh my gosh, I think it's 5 years ago now. I did my very first live event where we had a number of our guests come out and speak on a topic. It was on marketing, and I was the MC. I hosted the event. And what was interesting about it is that when I walked into the room, I had told them this is going to be a learning style kind of workshop, and they set up the whole class to kind of look like they put 2 chairs in front with the table and some flowers and coffee cups on them as if we're going to have an interview. And my partner walked in the room and said, "Wow, that's a great idea. You should do that someday." That model. And I just thought to him, well, it's funny because now that's what we do. We have a live show where we actually have, an audience, and we have, 2 chairs, and, it's a wonderful set. And it's funny, but he envisioned it way before I even did it. And here you are, you're a professor at UC Davis and Napa Valley College. And here that moment, you had no idea, I guess, at that moment when you went to go look for information and that you were going to be doing this one day. That
it would come full circle. Yeah, exactly.
Life is very interesting, I tell you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but I don't think I've ever referred to that as a light bulb moment, but that is very appropriate, that it was just that.
Wow. And I have a good friend that just took over the business of a wine store in my neighborhood, and I love this wine store. I knew the old owners. They were an Italian couple that did a phenomenal job. But now they're taking it over, and I haven't really talked to them too much. But is there a lot going into running a wine store or liquor store? Would you have any advice for anyone who thinks, hey, that'd be a great business for me to go into?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, my business, who I also work with, like I said, I work directly with wineries, but I also work with anybody who wants to start their own wine business. But I will say, actually, with the exception, I've never helped a wine store. I work with individuals who say, "Oh, I want to start my own wine label," and these are individuals that they're not going to go buy or build a brand new winery. They're going to approach an existing winery and say, "Hey, I would, want to send you some grapes or have you make and bottle some wine for me, and then I'm going to go sell it as my own business. And the term we use in the industry, in the wine world, is custom crush. Ooh. They are what we call a custom crush client, and I work with individuals like that to get their necessary federal and state licensing to start a new wine business and provide the guidance that they need at that stage. So that's also a lot of what I do, in addition to working one-on-one with wineries, and then also, like I said, doing the training of winery staff.
And that's something I hadn't thought about. There is a license involved here. You just can't open it up tomorrow and just start crushing grapes in your basement and selling it.
That's right. Because it's alcohol. And you're right, that's a good example, because there's a lot of your home winemakers, if you will. Yeah. Look, I've been making this stuff in my garage for years, and everybody keeps telling me I should sell it. And that's when they move into my world. And I say, oh, by the way, just any of that stuff you've already been making that's still sitting in your garage, you can't sell that.
Oh, really?
Because you made it before you had a license.
Oh, my. And this is, my dad was a beer maker. He loved beer. He came from Germany. Yeah. So he made beer. He once tried the wine. It came out horribly. But he got really, it was horrible. You don't want to go near that stuff. But, the beer was quite good, strong, but very good. And it's interesting because you'll think, hey, I make this stuff for years. It's like, I've been making pudding for years. Let me just sell it to my neighbor. But there's regulations involved there. You're breaking the law. You can't just sell alcohol without having that license.
Exactly. That's it. That's what I say. That's as soon as you say, oh, I want to be able to sell this, sell me a bottle. That's when you cross into my world. And so unless that wine was made at an existing licensed winery, it can't be sold legally. So, and I often get to be the party pooper, as I say, in my business for people. But actually,
I think what they come to realize is that you're taking this to a professional level, and where you make it at your home and just has to taste good for you. Now you have to look at it from a totally different perspective. You're here to provide a service and a wonderful product for others that are safe, and that they're going to love at the same time, and of course following regulations.
Yeah, and then here in again Napa, in the city of Napa, if I wanted to, I could get set up with a winery license at my house. And I could make wine in my garage and sell it. I couldn't have people come to my house to taste my wine or buy my wine, but I could legally, if you will, on paper, become a winery at my house, and I could make up to 480 gallons a year. And I've helped several businesses like that, because that's how most folks start out. People will call me and they say, oh, I want to get started with a wine business. Oh, I'm going to be really small, though. I'm starting really small. I said, well, most people start really small. Even Ernest and Julio Gallo started small at one time.
All businesses have to start somewhere. I was talking to a farmer on 14th Street, Union Square. They have a wonderful farmers market that comes every Saturday and the weekends, and there was a wine farmer or a woman who was there selling wine that she makes at her farm. And I said, oh wow. So I was looking at her wine. She wasn't having people taste it, but she was explaining the blends and whatever. And I said to her, oh, do you do sparkling wine? Because I really like it. And she's like, no, it's way too much difficulty making the wine sparkle. It's something with carbonation. Is that a really much harder thing to go into if you're going to decide to do sparkling wine only?
It is. They're much less common. Like even here in Napa County, I think there's maybe half a dozen sparkling wine producers. And you're right, it is a different. It goes through the first stage, what we call the if you will, that a still wine goes through. But then you have the secondary stage, and it's it's more involved.
Labor intensive.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, this has been such an awesome talk, and I want people to go out there today if they're interested in even just getting a better handle on their own wine and exploring the world of wine, or maybe thinking, maybe this is something I'd like to do someday. They can check out your book, The Inside Story of a Wine Label. Where can they get that and find out more information about you? And maybe take your course.
Yeah. So the book is on Amazon. available on Amazon. My business is Wine Compliance Alliance, so if they search for that, they'll find my website. The book is also available there, although I think it takes you right back to Amazon's page. Mm-hmm. But yeah, they can find my business page, and there is an opt-in there where they could put in their name and email address, and then they would be on my weekly newsletter list where I share about current topics, obviously related to winery compliance. I share when I'm offering trainings and information like that. And then obviously they can scroll back through my blog archives, which there's a lot of because I've been blogging for several years now.
Well,
so, yeah, and again, like we mentioned earlier in the call, that there are not a lot of folks that run this type of business, a winery compliance business, and which is a wonderful luxury to have as a business person.
You're the go-to person.
Because it's so specialized, and I am very, very fortunate to have had the background that I've had, where I worked, as I like to say, in the trenches at several wineries. So not only do I understand winemaking, but then I obviously understand directly how it then translates into, how to report things on the federal reports, how to put things onto a wine label.
Well,
and then obviously how to explain it to somebody.
Yes. This has been truly fascinating. I want to thank you again, Anne, for coming to share this great wisdom today. I know it's going to intrigue many out there and get them finding out more about that wine that they love so much. And I want to thank you again for coming to share on Savvy Business Radio today.
Yeah, well, thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Is your company one of the 93% surveyed, indicating they are ineffective at forming strategy? Companies successful in forming strategy use a strategic decision process. Foresight Business Consulting is developing an online course that teaches a new strategic decision process. You can enroll as a founding member at a fabulous discount during Foresight's crowdfunding campaign. Visit the Lean Strategy Masters campaign page at bit.ly/Lean Strategy Masters, or search for Lean Strategy Masters on Indiegogo.com.